welcome to Bow Ties are sometimes called myself, Ashley. Good evening, Ed. Are you there?
I'm here, Ash. Just been to shut the door to stop the cats coming in, disturbing proceedings.
Hey, we couldn't have that. Can you imagine pressing mute on your space bar at the wrong time? We're also joined by James. You right, James?
I am. How we doing, chaps?
Very good, very good. I've got my tea here, so I'm sorted. So I'm living life on the edge. And we are joined by a very special guest, Will Hadcroft. How are you,
Da,
Will?
da, 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 da. I'm all right, thanks, Ashley. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
Well, no, thank you for coming on. So we've got a few questions for you this evening, Will. You've sort of probably
Okay.
seen a theme if you've listened to any of our shows recently. So James and Edward are going to interrogate you to within an inch of your life. Looking,
Right.
hey, they're looking ready. Might even take
I hope I don't get killed off like Martin Jarvis if I get it wrong.
We can't afford the special effects.
So what we're going to do, because we're all looking pretty good here, chaps, we're going to do a little screenshot, little smile there for promo. There you go. Lovely, gents. Lovely. So I do believe this evening's proceedings is going to be started by young James. James, are you good to
Young
go?
James, bless you. That's one of the few forums I can still be referred to as young James with anybody. I do appreciate it. Well, Will, I can't believe you're with us. It's an absolute honour and a privilege, and we're very grateful for you coming on. I want to have a chat with you about your writing career. We'll talk a little bit about the many books and many genres you've written in before Ed's going to come in and talk specifically about some of your Doctor Who work. First off, I suppose I'm really interested, given the length of your career. You've been writing books for around 20 years or more now, I believe. You've started with children's fiction. You've written books in young persons, young adults fiction. Now, of course, with BBC writing audio books. You've written a very well received book about your own personal experience as being late diagnosed Asperger's syndrome, undiagnosed as a child. So, with all that going on, you've obviously been writing for a great chunk of your life. Can you point to a time when you were growing up or afterwards when you thought, actually, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I think with the Terence Dicks novelizations, I wasn't a very good reader as a child. I wasn't a fast reader. And even now, I read at the same speed as you would if you were reading it out to somebody. So I can't skim read or anything like that. So I have to persevere with a book. But I was given 2 copies of Target novelizations. Well, I must have been about 11 or 12 or something like that by a cousin. And one was Doctor Who and the Daleks by David Whittaker. The other was Doctor Who and the Cave Monsters by Malcolm Hulke. And I was absolutely gripped by both of them because I was a Doctor Who fan anyway. And I would have seen the 5 Faces of Doctor Who. So I was aware of the early Doctors, and my mother used to talk about them because she didn't think much of Tom Baker. She used to talk about Patrick Troughton and William Hartnell in particular. So to read Doctor Who and the Daleks and know it's William Hartnell and the John Pertwee one, the Cave Monsters, aka the Silurians, I was really taken by the way the Daleks was written in the first person as Ian Chesterton. Of course, I hadn't seen the broadcast version at that point. It hadn't come out on VHS, I don't think, for some years hence. And I'd never seen the Silurians. So I was just reading that as a novel. The Silurians one really got me because Malcolm Hulke had a great talent for putting you in the mind of the character, even the Silurian character as he's wandering around on the moors. And I remember the emotional impact of the ending where the Brigadier orders the bombing of the base. And even at a tender age, I was aware that an intelligent race was being buried and possibly all killed off. And I shared the Doctor's, horror at what was going on at the end there. So I had the desire to be a writer as early as that. But when I remember with the Terence Dicks ones, which I caught up with later, they used to be in the back of the hardbacks, which I used to have a look at them at school and school library. and there'd be a thing in the back about the author, and there'd be a photograph of Terrance Dicks. And I just used to look at that and think, I want to be like you when I grow up. So the seeds of wanting to be an author, and a Doctor Who author as well, were sown then.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, I was going to get on later to the fact that your Doctor Who isn't just a new thing with you. It's threaded its way through great chunks of your past.
Oh yeah.
But that's fascinating. And I think it's probably something I share with you. I used to read those in school as well. I get them from the library. All of these Terrance Dicks books, they were fantastic. So you've grown up. You've made those steps into your writing. You've continued your writing. As we touched on, you've now over your career worked with a great many different kinds of publisher, from small scale companies, indie companies, and now you're writing the audio books with the BBC. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about how you first got published, and I suppose then overall, how do those different experiences change? How has the world of publishing changed in the time you've been doing it?
Well, the first one was a children's novel called Android. That's Anneddroyd. So my Android predates Russell T Davies's by quite a few years. Android and Century Lodge. Yeah, so I came up with that initially as an idea for a television program, because I grew up watching Stig of the Dump, Thames Television's production of Stig of the Dump and Chucky, and all these dramas on children's BBC and children's ITV. And I wanted to create something that was like that and for that kind of audience. So I wrote it up in 1996 as an episode 1 script, and then put it in a drawer. And then I just happened to be listening to a relative of mine had a record shop, collector's record. And he had the radio on, BBC GMR, which as it was then, Greater Manchester Radio, now Radio Manchester. And they had an interview with a guy called Nigel Bent, and he was there in behalf of Callum Kerr, and together they were CK Publishing, and they set up a little publishing outfit in Stockport. And they were basically inviting authors to submit ideas. They published a few little books of poetry and various bits and bobs already, but they were having a launch due in Stockport, and they were inviting people to pitch. So I thought, I'll write up the first 3 chapters of Android and Century Lodge. So I got out the old script, read through it, reminded myself of what the core idea was, and wrote up three chapters and a synopsis as to how the rest of it would develop. So in my mind, it's planned out as 6 half-hour episodes, like an old Doctor Who. So I know, when I look at the novel, I know where the cliffhanger endings would have been. Every other chapter, that would have been the end of an episode. So I submitted that, and then got the phone call from him that he got quite engrossed in it, and he commissioned it. So I was absolutely staggered. I mean, this was a tiny company, just 2 men basically, in Stockport. And that was published in, I'll never forget it, 13th of June 2002. You don't forget a date like that when it's your very first one, And it sold in the low hundreds. It didn't blow anybody away particularly, but it has a little following all its own. And I'm hoping, as my profile through the Doctor Who audios rises, that I might republish Android with a mainstream publisher at some point. So that's how it started. Then with the Asperger's thing, I was listening to. Oh no, I read an interview with Gary Newman, the musician, and he said that his wife's brother had been diagnosed with Asperger's, and because she now knew the diagnostic criteria for it, she then said to Gary Newman, "I think you've got it." And I became aware of it then. And then, of course, there's the fan gene, written by Gary Gillett for Doctor Who magazine. We can discuss this later on if you want. So that then got me looking up, what was he called? Luke Jackson. There'd been a BBC Two documentary called My Family and Autism. And Luke Jackson at that time was 14. And he presented the documentary about his own Asperger's and about the other variations of autism within his family. And he published a book called Freaks, Geeks and Asperger's Syndrome by Jessica Kingsley Publishers. So I bought that, read that, then read Tony Attwood's complete guide to Asperger's. And then I went to the Jessica Kingsley Publishers website and saw that they accepted unsolicited material. So I had sort of self-diagnosed by this point. I'd been through a rough time at secondary school, struggled in my first couple of jobs with social interaction and immense shyness, actually, very, very withdrawn and full of passion and ideas, but not able to project them with any kind of confidence. So I was a kind of contradiction, and I was a paradox of being one thing inside, but not really coming across as that outside. So I put together 3 sample chapters again. I think a couple from very early on, and one from when I think it might have been when I started my first job or something, to demonstrate my inability to fit in, and also my desire. I had a strong desire not to fit in just for the sake of fitting in. You know, I didn't want to compromise, which is all part of the condition. And when you look into the condition of Asperger's, it's all there, everything I was feeling. And because I was very obsessed with The Prisoner, I called the book The Feelings Unmutual, because of the episode of The Prisoner, A Change of Mind, where number 6 is branded unmutual by the village. So there was even a link to that in the title of the book. So that publisher was small but international. You know, Jessica Kingsley's it's not huge. It's not, well, I say it's not bestseller material. 1 or 2 of their titles have been bestsellers. I think Luke Jackson's book was, and some of the sort of what's the word, reference books are, and maybe a handful of autobiographical things. But generally, most of what they put out, I don't think would reach bestseller status, although they are international. So I'd gone up a step from a very, very tiny company to a small but recognized company. So after that, I wanted to do a sequel. I wanted to do a sequel to Android and Sentry Lodge. Incidentally as well, the Jessica Kingsley republished Android and Sentry Lodge as an Asperger adventure. They had a range called Asperger Adventures. So that was nice as well, to give it a second life. Again, it only sold in the low hundreds because they were really marketing it not towards children, but towards educators and clinical psychologists and people like that, you see. So it never ended up on the shelves in Waterstones or anything like that. So I wanted to do a sequel, and they hadn't sold enough to warrant doing one. So then I looked into self-publishing. A good friend of mine in Northern Ireland called Daryl Sloan had published a children's book called K-On, which is spelt C-H-I-O-N, but pronounced K-On. It's either Latin or Greek, can't remember which. And it means like snow. And he'd come up with this story of set in a school, and this substance falls overnight that looks like snow. But if you touch it or stand on it, you get stuck to it and you can't move. You know, if you step out of your shoes onto it, then your socks get stuck to it. You know, you can't move around. I found that a really great idea for a story and very well written. And I had an exchange with him. I'd known him for several years before that. I wrote for a fanzine called RQC, which stands for Really Quite Cosmic. And this was in the early 90s. And Daryl Sloan was one of the contributors to that. So I kept in touch with him across the years. That was produced by a gentleman called Gavin Wilson. Really quite cosmic. So for would-be writers, you know, this is the place to start. Fanzines, and now we've got stuff online that you can contribute to as well. So he had self-published K-On! So he helped me set up the sequel to Android and Sentry Lodge, which was Android and the House of Shadows. And that didn't sell very well at all, because one of the things, James, you were asking about the differences between self-publishing and indie companies and the like, is that with self-publishing, you have to do everything yourself, right? So you have the freedom to publish whatever you like. You know, you can discuss whatever you like. The subject can be whatever you like. The characters can be. It doesn't really matter. There are no rules as such. But then you've got to publicize the thing. And if you don't have a PR company and you don't have that much money to throw about, back in that time, certainly before the internet really took off, there was no real way of spreading the word about what you were doing. So I think I sold about 50 copies of that, and then it was dead, you know, even though you can still get it now. It's print on demand, so copies are printed one at a time. But I think the key word in that phrase is demand, and there wasn't much. So that didn't last long. And then a lady got in touch with me, and this is 2009. A lady got in touch with me called Teresa Cutts, who had read The Feelings Unmutual and wanted to know what I was doing, what I was going to be doing next. And I was so disillusioned by that point with self-publishing that I was ready for giving up. But because she has experience in PR and sales, nothing to do with publishing, completely different area of life, but she has those skills. We made a little deal that I would write the stuff and she would help sell it. So we then set up our own little publishing outfit, Fabulous Books, FBS for short. And we published the third Android book through that, and a number of other titles as well, including some Doctor Who people. We've published Sixth Sense, which is Colin Baker's newspaper articles, a book by Terry Malloy, Montmorency Montgomery Bear, or Monty. You might have met Monty. If you've met Terry, you might have seen his bear, Monty, which he carries with him. And that's like a sort of Winnie the Pooh type thing, you know, where all it's like rhyming verse, but it's telling a story. And some lovely illustrations by Paul Mars for that. Managed to get Paul Mars to do the drawings for it. The best-selling one so far is Colin the Camper Van by Timothy Bentinck. So during that time, I'd met John Ainsworth some years previously, who's now the senior producer for Big Finish Productions, but he works with BBC Audio and he works with Audible as well. And I'd kept in touch with him. And we needed somebody, when we were doing the stuff with FBS, we had no idea about graphic design, and we knew about the design package called InDesign, but we didn't have it. And even if we did, we didn't know how to use it. But I thought, because John had worked in magazines, he worked for Visual Imagination Limited. He was the editor of Cult Times. Remember that? The sister magazine to TV Zone. So I asked him if we were bunging him a few quid, would he do the graphics and typesetting for us on a few titles. So he did What's All the Fuss About Doctor Who, that one. He did the cat stories that I published about my own cats. And one other, I think, can't remember now. But I do wonder if John being involved in that way maybe kind of reinforced in his mind that I was not a one-trick pony, you know. A lot of Doctor Who fans who would want to be writers just write Doctor Who things. And I think editors sometimes They want someone who is a writer first, if you see what I mean, and a Doctor Who fan second. And I think maybe I had proved that to John. So then it was 2019. It was actually 1 month after my mother had passed away. An email came through from John Ainsworth, BBC Audio, looking for new writers for the audio originals. Would I be interested in submitting some ideas? So that's how that began. So it's really a bit of what you know and a bit of who you know.
Absolutely, that's a hell of a journey. It really is. You've encompassed there a lot of the different books you've written, a lot of different titles you've done. Each one, I suppose, in a different way, or each series that you've done, it would be pitched slightly differently, or maybe have a different target audience. And the stuff you're doing now is, different to what you started out doing. How do you consciously, as a writer, approach each story, knowing it's going to be a different set of people potentially? They might all read all of your books, but do you approach stories consciously differently each time, other than the intent to write a good story?
Yeah, I suppose you are kind of thinking of your audience. Obviously, Android. Well, with Android, I was writing it for myself as a teenager. Like I said before about growing up with Stig of the Dump and Aliens in the Family and the John Wyndham Chucky adaptation. I was really writing for me at the age I was when I was soaking up those things. So I'm 84 was Chucky, so I was 14 when Chucky was shown, and when the Tripods was shown as well. A big fan of the Tripods. I know I'm sort of in a minority loving it as much as I do, but I really love the Tripods books that were unfortunately not completed on television. But so I was writing for the boy who loved all that, for when it came to Android. When it comes to obviously the feelings are mutual, and that's autobiographical. So you're writing about your own experiences, but you're also aware that the people it's for are other people who have the same feelings and haven't yet been diagnosed, or maybe they recently have and they're struggling. Because there's nothing better than coming across someone who's going through all the same things, and you think, oh, it isn't just me. So I guess that was the approach there for that one. Mia and the Woodshed Cats. Well, we had 4 cats, and then we had 2 cats who were in a barn next door that were wild. And I kept having these little anecdotal moments of craziness with them and noting them down in a notepad. I'm thinking if I get enough here, I could write a book about all this. But also I had people telling me, cats, everybody loves cats. So you write a book about cats, it'll go through the roof. So I had that in the back of my mind. Everybody loves cats. So I contacted an artist who paints in oil called Owen Claxton. Marvelous artist. And he illustrated those books inside and out. He also did Colin the Campervan for us later as well. So there I was just thinking of cat lovers and my love for my own cat. Then, of course, when we get to Doctor Who, you've got a very different kind of audience. So you're writing for people who really know their stuff, You can't just make some story up and sell it to them as Doctor Who. It has to feel like Doctor Who. It has to be recognizable, So you've got a different approach there as well.
Absolutely, but one very much that you can tap into with your own love of the show going back to childhood. So everything you've done, I suppose most writers would say the same, but it all comes from your own life experience in one way or another.
Yeah, I would say so. Obviously, you can do research on things and write about something you don't know anything about. But I tend to, in my fiction, I tend to sort of root it down in reality. Android and Sentry Lodge. Well, Sentry Lodge was a place near where I lived in Farnworth in Bolton. and the mill and the lodge. I used to walk the dog round there, and that's where I came up with the idea for it. So I decided there was a secret base underneath the pond, and the children would get to it through a hidden tunnel inside the mill, and the android schoolgirl was created by these guys underneath the pond to be a weapon. And of course, it gets out and then comes into the care of the children in the story. And they top the bad guys, and then you've launched a series then the rest of it. So that was rooted in the real world. I was very taken with an interview with Kenneth Johnson, American writer who wrote V, the miniseries. And but before that, he adapted The Incredible Hulk to television. He's the guy who came up with the Bill Bixby, Lou Ferrigno Incredible Hulk series. And he disliked comic books. When he was instructed to adapt the Incredible Hulk, he really didn't want to do it. So he basically just ditched the Stan Lee storyline and wrote a completely new story of his own, but sunk it as much as he could in the real world. His belief was, if you're going to try and sell something absurd to your audience, I mean, Bill Bixby turning green and bursting out of his shirt and becoming Lou Ferrigno is absurd, you know? So his idea was, rather than it being, as the Stan Lee comic book would have it, Bruce Banner working on a gamma bomb for the military, and then he gets caught in the blast of it when it goes off, and it doesn't kill him, but it mutates him into the Hulk. Rather than it being that, he would say, no, it's Dr. David Banner. So he got rid of the alliteration with the name because he didn't like the rhyming names in comic books. So Bruce Banner became David Banner. It wasn't a gamma bomb. It was his wife had died in a blazing car and he couldn't summon the strength to save her. And that he then started to hear stories from other people who had summoned their hidden strengths, they tapped into the hidden strengths and saved their loved ones. Why could they do it and he couldn't? Then he looked into what gamma radiation actually is, and obviously it comes from the sun, and research into DNA and how manipulating DNA would create a mutation. And so all of that is, I'm sure you've seen the pilot of the Incredible Hulk series, all of that is put into this film. It's very serious, the tone of it. I mean, we can all laugh at the fact that Lou Ferrigno's pants don't come off, but his shirt's ripped to shreds, and the frizzy wig and all the rest of it. But in terms of the approach to it as a piece of work, deadly serious. So that's why the series ran for 5 years. It outlived all the other things that were on at the time, like Wonder Woman and Spider-Man, because of his insistence of rooting it in the real world. So if everything that surrounds the lie, as it were, the lie that Bill Bixby can turn into Lou Ferrigno, if everything around the lie is truth and it's in a recognizable world, you can sell the outrageous concept that's in the middle of it. So Banner being very lonely, he hates the thing that he turns into and wants to cure it. The Mr. McGee character being like Inspector Javert from Les Miserables, pursuing Jean Valjean, instead of the Hulk fighting mutations and monsters and the US Army chasing him across the desert. Instead of that, set it in recognizable America. He's coming across ordinary people with problems that they're needing to overcome. And when he gets involved, he gets in trouble, and that triggers the metamorphosis. So you've got human stories then that you can tell. And then, of course, when that's resolved, he moves on to the next town and it all starts again. Always on the hunt for the cure to his problem. So I'd heard Kenneth Johnson talking about all this, and I thought that's what I need to do with this android. It needs to be like the famous five. It needs to be like Aliens and the Family and Chucky and all the rest of it, but it also needs to feel real. It needs to be a council estate. It needs to be a secondary school. And so I was able to then build into it experiences from my own childhood and fictionalize them. So it's partly the fantastical story, it's partly the desire to root it in reality, and it's partly stories from my own life, all woven together. And all the Android novels, I've done 3 at the moment. There's a 4th on the laptop that's unpublished. I've got 6 more. I've got 2 more of the 6 in my head, brewing. So I have an ending in mind, and I'm slowly working towards an ending. But I need a bigger publisher. I need someone who can get it seen. So hopefully, I'll get there at some point. It's all there. If somebody wants to republish the first 3 and then publish the last 3 fresh, it's all there for the taking.
Absolutely.
But,
I'm sure you will get there.
well, we'll see. See, this is another thing to do with publishing. There are a lot of things that one assumes about it, and then when you get involved, you find out that none of them are true. Like I used to get people saying to me, all you need to do is get into the schools, get school libraries, go and talk to the kids in the classes, and then it'll all start happening. Well, I did do that, and I found that it didn't all start happening. You could talk to a class of 30 children, and they've been prepped that you were coming, and the parents are told that you're coming. But if you're not famous, there's not going to be a long line of kids wanting your book. I spoke to 2 classes of 30 in the same school, and I think I sold about 6 books off the back of it because I wasn't known. The teachers loved it because they got tons of material out of it for future lessons. And one of them told me, "Oh, I have weeks out of this, weeks worth." So it went down well with the kids at the time and went down well with the teachers, but it didn't translate to sales. You see people in the media, I saw on Northwest Tonight, BBC Northwest Tonight, a guy who was a manager at McDonald's, and he'd self-published some crime novels straight to Kindle, and done so well, he claimed, that he was able to give up his manager job at McDonald's, and now he earns a modest living from selling his crime books. I'd like to know if he still is making his living that way, or if it was just something that's happened for a while. Another one I heard about in America, an author called Victorine Lesky, who was in hospital and wrote a novel on a laptop while she was in hospital, and it was involved in websites and forums where writers exchange ideas and so on. So she built up an audience and self-published her novel and ended up on the New York Times bestseller list. And then, of course, then gets interviewed because she's done that, and it snowballs and builds. So when you listen to these stories, you're given a false sense of what's likely to happen if you self-publish a book. You think, oh, I'm going to be like Victorine Lesky, I'm going to be like the bloke at McDonald's. And my experience is, no, you'll sell modestly. You may sell less than 100 of each thing that you do, and you gradually build it up. It's very, very slow progress. In my case, I can't talk in generalizations because it's different for each author. Some people, it takes off, they get the break, and it takes off. A lot of the people who write these Doctor Who's, the books and the audios, they all started in, many of them, or most of them, started in their 20s. When you think about the authors of the New Adventures range, and they were in their 20s and early 30s. Well, I'm in my early 50s, and the Resurrection Plan, I was 52 when that came out. So what I'm trying to convey is it's not as it seems. There's this sense of you just get a lucky break and away you go. Big Finish will be knocking at my door. Well, they haven't knocked yet, I have to say. I've had fans approach me at conventions. I went to the Hooverville in Derby, and somebody said, "Big Finish next, mate." And I thought, well, that's lovely, but it's not at all guaranteed, you know. But I'm happy to have got as far as I have, because there are a lot of fans who are hoping to, who haven't even got as far as I have now. So I am not taking it for granted. I appreciate what I've accomplished.
Absolutely, and you should be very, very proud of what you've accomplished as well. It's fantastic. Um, I mean, it's fascinating listening to you and your experiences. And again, really do appreciate you spending the time with us. I suppose there's an awkward question. My last question for you, it's going to come in a second. I suppose it's an awkward one, and maybe there's no real way to answer. But given you've written very movingly in your factual book about your personal journey, and that also feeds into some of your character development with Android as a character. They're both vitally important routes in terms of reaching people, because people will read and will pick things up from stories, or they might want to research and pick your factual book up. Do you have a personal preference? What's easier for you? How is it easier for you to write about your experiences factually or in fiction?
That's a very good question. I would say they're both easy in terms of actually getting it out your head and onto the page. But when you're writing factually, you do wonder how much of this is going to be cripplingly embarrassing. Because I wrote with the feelings of mutual, I just wrote it down as it was, and the things that I did, things that happened to me, all as a result of the condition, putting my foot in it with people, saying the wrong thing, not defending myself when I should do because I'm shy, and some pretty embarrassing things, which I really cringe. I cringe when I read it. I can't pick the feelings unmutual up and really read it properly. I might slide it off the shelf every now and then, and I'll get through one page and just think, oh no, 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 because I'm so far removed from that person that's described in there. I mean, that book ends at 2003, when I was 33. So I'm 53 now, and I don't feel like that person really. Most of what's happening there, I would never do it now. I would never say the things I say to people in that. So you've got the thing with the autobiography that you're pouring your heart out, but in the back of your mind when it's published, you're thinking, I hope people get this in the spirit it's meant. I hope they're not going to trample all over me because I expose my heart. Because that's the risk that you run when you publish an autobiography, and you're extremely candid, as I was in that. Now with fiction, you could tell many of the same stories, but dress it up as a story. And the audience, the reader might be wondering how much of this is Will Hadcroft and how much of it is made up. But they're never going to know if you don't say, So there's a kind of a safety net there with fictionalized fact, that you can dress things up a little bit and present it. Also, I found with fictionalizing things, you can actually be an observer of the event rather than inside it, if you get what I mean. You write it out, and then when you read it back and you see the characters are all reacting to one another and the situation, which might be something that happened to you. I wrote about in Android a bullying scene at school, which had a devastating effect on me in real life. The effects of it lasted for decades. But I was able to get my own back on the bully in the book, which I didn't do in real life. I was just crippled by what happened emotionally and stunted for quite some years when I think about it. But in Android, the boy that's bullied is crippled by what happens to him, but because Android is there, she recognizes the injustice of what's happening and gets retribution in his behalf. And the bully is sorted out and turned into a laughing stock. And then the boy who was bullied then becomes a bit of a hero, thanks to Android's intervention. So yeah, so you can play around with things in fiction, and you can tell your life story and events from your life, and just dress it up as a story. It's also good if for inspiration. If you're stuck for ideas, you just have a route through your own past and see if anything could be inserted or made use of.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you. Well, I'm going to dip out at that point and let Ed come in with his. He's been waiting patiently, Ed. Thank you. So thanks very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So thank you very, very much for that, James, and Will. Amazing insight into yourself, and your career up to this point. I'm going to take over. Really, I'm going to do the more specific Doctor Who questions on your BBC audio book, The Resurrection Plant. You've already touched on how you were commissioned to write it. I remember you said you had an email, but what happened after that?
Okay, so what happened was the producer, Michael Stevens, had said to John Ainsworth, the editor, we need some new blood, we need new contributions. And John thought of me. Now, what had happened was, which I didn't say before, was about a year before, I was at Big Finish Day. So this would have been 2018, Big Finish Day. And John was there. He was representing Jan Chappell, who played Callie in Blake 7, and they were promoting some Blake 7 audios. And I bumped into John, and we caught up. We hadn't seen one another for quite a few years. And I just said, as we were parting company, because he had to go off and supervise the Jan Chappell panel, I just said, if you're ever looking for writers, John, don't forget me, will you? And I think maybe, 12 months later, he may have remembered that I had said that because it came out of the blue, the email. I didn't really think I stood any chance at all. So when the email came through, as I say, 1 month after my mother had passed away in May, he said, we're looking for new writers. Do you have any ideas? And the process is to pitch 3 possible ideas, 1 paragraph for each idea, and a different doctor and companion lineup for each one. And then if they like any of the 3, they would choose the one they like best and go with that. So that would be the start of the process. So then when they choose the one they like best, they say, we want a 2-page synopsis or treatment. So you basically tell the entire story from beginning to end in 2 pages. It's not going to be like a back cover blurb where you leave a few dots and say what happens next. You have to basically tell the entire story, the way it ends, who the culprit is, everything in those 2 pages. And then based on that, so at this stage, you have not been commissioned. Nothing's been agreed. There's no guarantees it'll go any further. They could read that 2-page synopsis and think, no, that's not what we want. And that's the end of it. For me, thankfully, it was commissioned. And then based on that 2-page synopsis, you write up the full story, which is 10,000 words. An hour-long story is 10,000 words, 20 A4 pages. A lot shorter than you would imagine. And it requires a lot of discipline to stick to that, as I found out.
So yeah, you said you had to sort of pitch 3 different stories. Obviously, the one that was commissioned was the Resurrection Plant. Was that always a second Doctor story?
No, it wasn't. It was. I can't remember if it was for Virgin New Adventures or BBC Books, but it was. It was originally planned and submitted to either Virgin or BBC Books as a 7th Doctor and Ace story. Now, another podcaster, the rabbi from another planet, tells me that it feels very much like a Virgin New Adventure, The Resurrection Plant. It's interesting that he's picked that up from just listening to it, because that's what it was. It was a Seventh Doctor and Ace story, and I had the idea of what if a community got access to technology that enabled them to resurrect people, physically resurrect people when they die. And what if it was a kind of industrial environment where people are literally worked to death, resurrected back to life, and then worked to death again, and then resurrected back to life over and over and over. And what if the Doctor and Ace landed in the middle of all of that? And of course, there would be ethical questions to be asked. There would be, from the Doctor, perhaps a degree of hypocrisy in condemning them, because he can do that. He can be fatally wounded and regenerate. So I was fascinated by that idea of what if the Doctor happened upon people who could do that, and he had to. And then there was the question of where is this primitive society that's a bit like the Industrial Revolution? Where's it got this technology from? So that was a good question. So I called the story The Sanctity of Death. That was its title, because of the constant resurrections. The term sanctity of life had become meaningless. There was no sanctity of life. It was just exploitation and commercialism and all the rest of it. And they were making use of this technology. So I was very pleased with that title, The Sanctity of Death. I thought it had a poetic ring to it. So I during the submission process, it occurred to me, because of how they get hold of the technology, what if it wasn't the Seventh Doctor? What if it was the second? And what if it was pre the War Games, you know? Because the black and white episodes of Doctor Who, I mean, it's called Doctor Who for a reason. Nobody knows who he is. And until the War Games, you don't know who he is, where he's from, what he's about, what his people are, any of it. Yeah, there's nothing known until you get to the War Games. And he's very secretive about his identity. The people who travel with him don't know anything. I mean, when you get to the 1980s and the Doctor will liberally say, I am known as the Doctor, I am a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey in the constellation of Castorberus. It lays it all out on a plate. But in the 60s, there was nothing known. And even the people traveling with him, you know, Damien and Zoe, only knew he was a Time Lord when they. So I thought, how about that setup, that Doctor and those companions landing in the story of the sanctity of death? Because then you've got an additional thing there of the Doctor has to put a stop to what's going on and is condemning what's going on. But he has to keep his own nature and his own origin secret from the people he's dealing with, but also from his companions as well. So it adds an extra layer to things there, and it was very interesting. Once I'd made that switch, it was I really enjoyed writing that story. I really did, because it was just so interesting. Just that one alteration altered the mood of the whole thing.
Now, it's quite interesting that you're saying about originally a Virgin New Adventures, because they were very, very experimental stories, which, you know, the tagline to sort of broad and deep for the small screen. This story now, you've moved it from being a Virgin New Adventures with the Seventh Doctor and Ace. You've decided to set it during Series 6, which in itself was a lot more experimental a season than the sort of the whimsical Season 4 and the sort of the monster Series 5. Do you think the story benefited organically from being set during Series 6?
Well, it does feel part of it, doesn't it? If you've heard the story, it does feel like it belongs there. So I wasn't consciously thinking, oh, this is a good fit because it's like, you know, it belongs with the invasion and it belongs with the mind robber and it belongs with the Seas of Death and the War Games. I wasn't thinking that way. But when you listen to it, you could slot it in anywhere, couldn't you, in that season? And it does feel part of it. I was very conscious of getting the voices of Dr. Jamie and Zoe right. And of course, I watched the war games and the invasion beforehand just to get the speech patterns and the rhythm of the way they speak, so that they would feel authentic. And the way Fraser reads it, he reads it the way I wrote it. There's a sequence where something is said to the doctor. I can't remember what now, but his reaction is, "Oh dear." And I think in my mind I was thinking of Patrick Troughton in The Five Doctors, where he reacts that way to something. I think it might be where he says, "We may be playing the game of Rassilon at this very moment." It might be that. Oh dear. So I wrote that in reaction to something he'd been told. And Fraser read it with that inflection exactly. So I wrote it right, he read it right, and it feels authentic as a result. I'm very pleased with the way it comes across, the way Fraser reads it, and the sound design as well. It feels like a real place. And I don't know about you, but when I was listening to it, I forgot that it wasn't a full cast drama. The sound design really draws you in, and the way Fraser reads it. So I feel it does belong in season 6. Yeah, I think you would slot it in anywhere that it would work.
Yeah, in my head canon, it feels like sort of Jamie and Zoe have been with the Doctor a fair while, especially Zoe's been with him a fair while. To me, it comes just before the Space Pirates, sort of heading towards the end of the era. But anyway, I digress like I always do.
Join the club.
You've alluded to Fraser Hines there. I mean, what was your reaction when you found out it would be Fraser Hines narrating your work?
Well, I was thrilled to bits. Initially, I was told, so this was very early on in the process. Initially, I was told it would likely be Wendy Padbury. So Michael Stevens, the producer, I don't know if it was based on availability or what, but that's what I was told initially. And I imagined Wendy reading it and thought, well, yeah, she'd do a good job of it. And obviously, when she speaks Zoe's lines, she is Zoe. So she speaks Zoe's lines. She sounds like Zoe. Excuse me. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I want a male reader, really, and someone who could do a decent Patrick Troughton impersonation. So I had a little list in my head of who it could be, David Troughton or Michael Troughton, they would be ideal because they do sound like him anyway. And then I thought, well, I've got a couple of Big Finish CDs where Fraser is Jamie and the Doctor, and he does a really good impression of the Doctor as the way Patrick plays him. So I would kind of get 2 for the price of 1 if it was Fraser. I would have Fraser playing Jamie's dialogue as Jamie. And so when you hear it, it's flipping heck, it's Jamie reading my lines. And then when he does Patrick Troughton, it's so close. Like I say, 2 for the price of 1. So I had nothing against Wendy Padbury as a reader. And if I ever do another second Doctor and she's the reader for it, great. But for my first one, I wanted someone who could do Patrick's mannerisms and sound like him. So I was thrilled to bits because I became set on Wendy Padbury doing it once I'd been told that. After initially I was thinking, I'd rather it was a man for this one. I came round to it, the idea of Wendy doing it, and was starting to imagine her reading it and what it might sound like. So when I got the email through saying they're going with Fraser, then I had to forget Wendy then. Forget Wendy, it's not Wendy now, it's Fraser, and reimagine what it might sound like. But yeah, he did me proud. It sounds exactly the way it sounds in my head,
And you can't ask for more than that, can you?
No, no, no. It's real dream come true stuff, Edward. It's as a Doctor Who fan who's always wanted to write Doctor Who, and to have. The funny thing is, it's kind of two in one again, in the sense that when it was the novels in the 90s, Virgin New Adventures and Missing Adventures, and then the BBC Past Doctor novels, I always wanted to, to contribute to one of those series. And then when Big Finish came out, I really wanted to do a Big Finish play. The idea of having a story performed by the people who were in it on television, my word. But these BBC audio originals are kind of a hybrid of the two, because they are it's prose, it's not a script, performed by different voices. It's one voice reading a prose story, but because it's got sound effects and incidental music in it, it's kind of a novel and an audio at once, if you see what I mean. So I kind of fulfilled two dreams there in one thing.
Fantastic.
So I was thrilled to bits when it came out. I really was.
So you said earlier on with the pitch, it's a 10,000 word pitch.
Yeah.
And the BBC releases, they tend to be, in old-fashioned terms, younger viewers may remember CDs, and they have to fit on one CD, which is about 74, 75 minutes.
Yeah.
Was the story heavily edited to fit into the time constraints?
The storyline wasn't. Everything that's in the storyline occurs in the published thing. But it was heavily edited because I wrote far too much. I had this whole sequence before the Doctor arrived. Several pages, something like 10 pages, something crazy like that. Thousands of words of the family at the beginning of the story. And I wanted to sort of show who they were and what they were like and what that world was like before the Doctor arrived in it. So I overwrote it massively. I think I ended up with 30 A4 pages. And 20 is the limit, really. So I sent it into John. I said, I know I've overdone it here, but see what you think so far. Is it reading right? Does it feel right? And he said it does, but we were going to have to lose 10 pages. Now that's a lot. That's a third of the story has to go. So I had to get rid of it. I had to be really ruthless and get rid of everything that wasn't crucial to the storyline. So that meant putting favorite scenes and cutting lines of dialogue that I really liked. But you just have to think, well, it's got to go. We've got to get this down to 20 pages. And in the end, we did. And listening to it now, it benefited greatly from it. This is another thing with inexperienced writers who they write a first draft and think that it's splendid, and then they self-publish it, and it's not had any critical eye on it. No editors, no friends offering constructive criticism. They'll just publish it as it is, and then people pull it apart, when they review it. So this is where my kind of experience has been with small indie publishers and even self-published. I've always worked with editors. So when John said 10 pages have to go, I didn't argue about it. I just thought, okay, you're the boss. We've got to get rid of 10 pages. And we kicked things around. We took bits out, and then what was left, some parts of what was left didn't make any sense because I'd explained things and the bits I got rid of. So then there had to be a rewrite to make it all sync up and be coherent. So we went through 5 drafts before it was ready. It took 5 drafts. I'm hoping the next one won't go through 5 drafts. I think I've learned a few lessons with the first one, what not to do.
And then when you're writing your story there, you've got a lot of supporting characters in there.
Mm-hmm.
Something I do when I'm listening to an audio or I'm reading a book, I tend to sort of fan cast them in my head. Did you have actors of the time in your head for sort of some of the supporting characters like Ren or the Regent?
Yeah, I did. Well, some of them, like names, for example, the girl Raimi, my wife's daughter, Marie, in 2018, sadly died. She was 46. She died of cancer. So Raimi, as Fraser pronounces it, in my head it was Raimi, but Fraser pronounces it Raimi, so it's Raimi now. That's an anagram of Marie. So Coral is Carol, my wife. The name Wetham, the husband, well, that's Matthew backwards. My youngest brother is Matthew. And I used to call, when I was a teenager, I used to call him Wetham. We used to have these silly names for one another. So I didn't tell him that I'd put Wetham in the story. I thought it'd be a laugh for him to listen to the story and find out that Wetham is in it. And the little boy, Vebu, Veb for short. Well, VEB was the last three letters on Matthew's registration plate on his car. So that was and he picked up on it. I thought he might miss that, but he realised that was his car, Veb. So I had a bit of fun with it, with names. Trace, when my mum was at the hospice near the end, my cousin Tracy was a regular visitor, so I thought I would name one of the characters Trace after her. In terms of sort of casting actors in your mind, Ren is described as having sandy hair and a square jaw, kind of horse-shaped face. And in my mind, that's Bernard Horsfall. And I wrote the dialogue as though Bernard Horsfall was delivering it. So I was thinking of, because he appeared a lot in season 6, didn't he? He appeared in the Mine Robber as Gulliver, and then he was the Time Lord in the War Games, and then he returned as Chancellor Goth in the Deadly Assassin with Tom Baker. So I thought, wouldn't it be funny if Bernard Horsfall turned up in my story in season 6? So in my mind's eye, it's Bernard Horsfall playing that part. And when you hear the description of him, that it is him. I'm describing him as he looked in the Deadly Assassin. Yeah, sandy hair and the square jaw.
Superb. Now then, so this is a story that needs to be listened to, knowing nothing, as there are and that are almost hidden in plain sight. Was it always your intention to add to the lore in this way?
Well, because the story started out as a submission to Virgin or BBC Books, no. The lore as it stood at the time, at the end of the original series, I suppose, I could mess around with what was established up to that point, and include some things. But of course, when I did this for BBC Audio, there were a few new things that have been added to the lore. So let me think. When did Jodie Whittaker debut? Was it 2015?
2018. Her first series. She appeared in first appearance was Christmas Day 2017.
Right. So there you go. You see, without giving anything away. So that was fresh in my mind. That Jodie was now the Doctor, and prior to her, of course, we had Missy, and as I was dealing with in the Resurrection Plant, I was dealing with a Doctor Who that's doesn't really reveal anything about the Doctor's origins or where he's from or what he is or anything. I mean, even regeneration wasn't called regeneration. It was just a change of appearance. So nothing was in place regarding who or what the Doctor was. So I agonized over this for a while, I thought, how much can I kind of go into that? How far should I go into it? All that stuff. Should I just sort of stick with what is known in the classic series and just keep it there? Or should I take on board what had then been recently revealed regarding the Doctor and his people? The new concepts that were being introduced, which were still, with Missy originally, and then the Doctor, him, herself, later on. I thought, do I include that? And if I do, am I going to get lynched by fans of the classic series who would go, that wasn't in the classic series? Or should I say, well, it's all one thing at the end of the day. It's one long progressive unfolding story. And although the audience of 1969 didn't know anything about it, the Doctor does. The Doctor knows what he is and who he is and what he's capable of and what happens under certain circumstances and what may happen from time to time without giving anything away. So should I include them? So I decided I would. Interestingly, my publishing partner, Teresa, who's not a Doctor Who fan and couldn't care less about it, she felt that I shouldn't include those new developments because she didn't like them herself, even though she's not just a casual viewer, really, can take it or leave it. But she didn't like the direction it was going in on television, so she felt that I shouldn't do it, and that I was selling out by including those things. I think I was right to include them. I think the program is going where it's going, whether we approve of it or not. We are, many of us celebrate where it's going. Others really don't like it. And I thought I've got to take the tack that it's going where it's going, and that is canon, and that's what it is now. And hope that the fans who listen to the Resurrection Plant can sort of come on board with it. I mean, the way I've done it, really, it doesn't really lay it on thick. Anyway, it's there are, especially at the very end. There's something that happens at the very end where there's a bit of a twist, and it's done in a very light and almost dismissive way, where somebody says to the character, "How do you feel?" and the character says, "I don't really feel that different." And that was me kind of answering the way it was handled on television, because I think they were very heavy-handed on television with all of that. I think they could have done it more subtly and could have done it with less joking around about testosterone and things like that. I think if a society is used to going through changes like that, it would be normal to them. There wouldn't be jokes about testosterone and thank goodness I'm this again and all that sort of stuff. So I thought, if I'm going to go there with mine, I'm going to do it the way I would have done it if I was writing television, which is just to say, oh, I'm different now, but it really is no different, and then move on as though it doesn't matter. So you guys know what I mean. The listeners will have to wait until they listen to the Resurrection Plant.
I mean, again, for a first published Doctor Who story, you haven't taken the easy route. You haven't done such and such of the such and such like a traditional story. You've really gone for a sort of bold and different and dangerous take on, the classic era. I mean, if you with your next story, where would you like to go next as a writer of Doctor Who fiction?
Well, just to answer what you said initially, one of the things was I wanted to impress John Ainsworth and Michael Stevens. So I didn't want to turn out a run-of-the-mill thing, Doctor Who by numbers that anybody could come up with, and then go, oh, this is just pedestrian Doctor Who. It's not what we want, So and I wanted it to be interesting. I wanted it to be layered. I wanted character development. I wanted, and again, like the Kenneth Johnson thing I was saying about earlier, root it in something that's recognizable and real. And of course, the sound effect, my word, that foundry and all of that, the sounds that David Rucroft put in. When I, in the prose, describe a klaxon going off in the distance, and then you hear the klaxon in the sound design, and the Gallifreyan stays a gun, and you hear that. There's a little joke in there referencing the Doctor Who sound effects record, which I won when Doctor Who Weekly ran a competition, the Doctor Who sound effects, and I won the record. I was thrilled to bits with it. And I remember one of the tracks on the B side was a Gallifreyan Staser, and it says Gallifreyan Staser gun, 3 blasts. So I put in the story, you hear a Gallifreyan Staser gun go off, and the Doctor goes, "That's a Gallifreyan Staser," and it fires 3 times, and then he goes, 3 blasts, which is a direct reference to the sound effects record. I'm going off on a tangent now, but I thought I'd throw that one in for you. So yeah, I wanted it to be multi-layered, and I wanted it to be engaging. You see, so that's why it came out as it did. The what would I do for the next one? Well, I have actually been commissioned to do another one. Sometime after Resurrection Planet came out, John was back in touch with me, and he said, "Michael wants you to do a Peter Davison one next." So we've gone from me choosing the Doctor to being asked to do a particular era, which is it's good for your self-confidence, it's good for your self-esteem that they've heard what you've done. I think, right, well, what can he do next? So Michael wanted me to do Peter Davison and Adric. So I got back to John and said, "Are we just talking about Peter Davison and Adric on their own, and I get rid of the girls in some contrived way? Or are we talking about the Peter Davison lineup, Adric, Tegan, Nyssa?" And he said, "Well, I guess he means that, really, Adric, Tegan, Nyssa." So that's a tall order, that. We've all heard the interviews with those who wrote for the television series, where you have 4 principal characters. You have Doctor and 3 others, and they all need their own screen time. They all need their moments. Otherwise, you end up parking one of them off in the TARDIS, or they fall unconscious for 3 episodes or whatever, so that you only have to write for 3. I didn't want to do any nonsense like that. So that was a real challenge. How do you write a story, an hour-long story with 4 heroes, and give them all equal time? So I've come up with, it's called Dark Contract. And I can't tell you a great deal about it other than it's set in Dickensian England. So I've had a lot of fun with that. I rewatched, as I watched it when it was broadcast years ago, the Andrew Davis adaptation of Bleak House. Excuse me. And I watched that just to get the rhythm of how they speak in Dickensian London. And I watched a couple of documentaries about workhouses as well, because there's a workhouse in the story. And I really can't say any more than that, because nothing's been released publicly. There's not even a blurb on it's been listed on Amazon, but it's just the title and the Doctor and companion lineup. So I don't think I should tell you any more than that.
Oh, no.
But it's a completely different vibe. You're dealing with the Davison era. The Doctor is very different. The companions are different. The kind of tone and mood and style of the piece is different, because it's a very different kind of production on television, and you want to get that across in your story. It needs to feel like the Davison era, So I've done the first draft of that. It's exactly 10,000 words long, 20 A4 pages. So I'm waiting for notes back from John and Michael. Things will have to be changed. Things will have to be thought. Things will have to be explained better. I'm looking forward to doing the edits, but I'm hoping it's not going to be five drafts this time round. I'm hoping I've learned a few lessons from the first one. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've had a name put forward as the reader, but given what happened with Wendy Parbury, I'm not going to say just in case it isn't them when it comes out. But it's very exciting because obviously I now know the process, having done the first one, so I know what I'm in for. I know that it's likely to sound pretty authentic, and it'll have the right version of the theme music at the beginning, the right kind of sound design. Yeah, very excited.
Have you got any idea when it's coming out? Or
It's down on Amazon as 1st of August.
brilliant.
So
Certainly
I haven't yet had any notes back. Like I say, I mean, they've got to book a studio, they've got to book a reader, they've got to get somebody to do the sound design for it. So I'm assuming the notes will be coming through soon. I can't see that they're going to just record the first draft. I don't think it's that good. I've been very nervous if they just went ahead and recorded the first draft. I want someone with a critical eye to come back with some notes, get it as good as it can be.
So I'm going to go back, rewind ever so slightly, just to say
Okay.
that Gallifreyan Stays a shot. I got chills when I heard that.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
proper tingle down the spine moment. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah, brilliant little touch.
All the Doctor Who sounds, not the sort of the world that I've created, but the Doctor Who sounds are all bang on, aren't they?
Yeah.
There's the Gallifreyan Stays, and there's another sound in particular that when you hear it, you go, "Oh, I know what this is," without it being described.
Yeah, definitely. So you've said now you've written for Troughton, you've written for Davison.
Yeah.
Is there any Doctor you would absolutely love to write for?
There is, yeah. As a teenager, when I was submitting ideas to Eric Sayward and getting no replies, because they weren't good enough, and I couldn't write well. It's as simple as that, really. You're crushed as a youngster because you think, I've got a great idea. But that was when Colin Baker was the Doctor, and he was very much my hero of my teens. Tom was my hero as a child, but Colin really was my hero. I was 14 when he arrived and 16 when he left. And it did my head in when he left, I have to say, because I felt like I had a sort of kindred spirit with him. Because I was socially awkward and frequently put my foot in it, and was sometimes accused of being aloof and too abrupt and things like that. He was all those things, as the Doctor, but also had a heart and was very caring and driven to put right things that were wrong and champion the underdog. All the classic Doctor things were all there underneath the brashness. And Colin Baker himself, whenever he was interviewed on Saturday Superstore or Wogan or whatever, you could see he really loved being in Doctor Who. And you could see he understood it, he got it, and he loved it. And I loved him loving it, So I used to always want to do a Sixth Doctor story. When Big Finish was launched, I thought, I hope I get a chance at this at some time, at some point, to write Colin Baker's dialogue and have Colin Baker perform it. Now, obviously, I'm not with Big Finish, but with BBC Audio Originals, I could pitch a story and have a story in mind for a Colin Baker and Perry story. But I want to write it in the first person. There's a particular angle I have on this idea where you have to break the rule of not knowing what the Doctor thinks. I agree. When Virgin had their writers' guidelines, one of the guidelines was that we must never know what the Doctor thinks. We are shown what he does, we hear what he says, but we don't know the thought processes. But because of this particular idea I have, it's fully dependent on it being written in the first person from the Doctor's point of view, and therefore would have to be read by Colin Baker. So there's no, we'll get Nicola to do this one. We'll get Bonnie to do it. No, you won't. It's got to be Colin Baker. So that's, the cake has been having these things published at all. the icing on the cake for me is Colin Baker reading in the first person as the Doctor and reading my words. If that happens, then, if they never ask me to do another, fine. It's been lovely while it lasted. But if I can have Colin Baker reading as the Doctor, I will be very happy indeed. That would bring the whole thing, it would be complete then. From reading the Terrance Dicks books years ago and wanting to be like him, and then my favourite Doctor from my teens performing something I've written. Yeah.
Magnificent. That would be absolutely marvellous. Colin, if by any chance you listen to this, I think we've got your number one fan here.
Well, I met him at the convention a while back because he endorsed the Feelings Unmutual way back when. So he knows of me, and I bumped into him a few times here and there. And we catch up when we talk. And I gave him the resurrection plans. Look what I've done. I gave it to him. So he knows I write these now. And I ran the storyline by him. I said, I've got one for you, but it has to be you reading it, and it has to be read in the first person. And I gave him the title of it. And I knew I had him engaged because he came up with an alternative title that he thought was better. Typical, really, isn't it? Colin Baker. I've got a better one. Okay, then, Colin, what is it? But I knew then. I thought he's engaged by this. He likes it. Tell John I'll do it. I thought, well, it's not as easy as that. I can't instruct John Ainsworth to commission it. I've got to come up with.
And this. Will, you'd be glad to know, is the last question. I'm going to go back.
I'm having a good time.
Oh, great. We're going to going back to the resurrection plans again. To those who have not heard it, I would describe the resurrection plans as a satirical, law-enriching homage to season 6. How would you write your own advertising for it?
Oh, how would I write the back cover blurb, I suppose? How would I sell it? That's a very good question. Well, it's about exploitation, really. That's the theme that runs all the way through, which is another thing about my approach. I don't like stories that are very obviously made up as they go along. There has to be thematic content. So that's the theme, exploitation. I suppose it would have to the question would have to be, how far would the Doctor go to protect his own secrets? Because in this story, he runs the risk of being exposed, who he is and what he is. And it's at a point in the Doctor's personal history where he's not inclined to divulge anything. And normally he would top the baddie, wouldn't he? Top the baddie, help the underdog, and then leave. If that meant that the bad guy ended up destroying himself at his own hand, then so be it. And the Doctor could just sort of disappear. But this is different, isn't it? This is different. He dare not antagonize the bad guy too much. Because there's, as you know, in the penultimate scene, there's like a little arrangement made. And it has to be that way. And it's something the Doctor has never done before. I mean, he's not inclined to let people off the hook, really. But this particular set of circumstances requires a set of, a new approach, if you like, a different approach than you would normally get in resolving things. Yeah. So how far will the Doctor go to protect his own secrets? I suppose that would be the blurb, wouldn't it? That would be a question left in abeyance.
That's magnificent. And if you're not intrigued by that, you're never going to be intrigued. If you are intrigued, the Resurrection Plant is available on Amazon at the strangely precise price of £10.12 on CD. It's £7.99 on Audible, and it's £6.99 on iTunes. And I highly recommend that you go out, get yourself a copy, listen to it, and just be prepared for one heck of a ride.
Thank you. And £10.12. I think the 12p is my royalty for each one.
But Will, thank so much for answering my questions on the resurrection plan. It was a joy to listen to the other night. Really sort of drew me in. It sort of starts off as one thing, then becomes another thing, and then you think, okay, I know where this is going. I know where this is going. I know what sort of Doctor Who story this is, and suddenly the rug is completely pulled under you from so much. There's no rug existing anymore. It's magnificent.
Well, I'm glad it had the desired effect.
Yeah. Ash, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you ever so much. That was fascinating. And listeners, I'm going to let you into a secret. I was so engrossed during that I actually forgot that we were about to come to the end of one of our Zoom sessions, and everyone went off. But you'll never know because we've edited it so well. But no, really fascinating, fantastic. Really enjoyed that. Will, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know James and Edward, I can speak for them. Well, I've already said it anyway. We're really looking forward to speaking to you this evening. We're writing away furiously with those questions. I said, it's all in hand. I just need to turn up and press record. No, it's been it's been brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Thank you. So, and on that bombshell, it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Bye for now.